Hey, welcome back to the Enjoy Shop. Today we're going to be putting together a lure coursing standard machine. This is a 12 volt, 2.5 horsepower system, and it's the standard machine that we sell on a high density polyethylene plastic stand. It's using a 200 amp continuous duty solenoid, and it's really the fundamentals of like keep it simple, stupid as far as lure coursing machines go. I've got two machines in front of me, one that is completely torn down and the other one that is built already. So let's first take a look at what the standard machine looks like and how it works. Here are the two machines right in front of me. The left one is obviously put together, the right one is not. Let's see how the normal machine basically works. So you have a positive connection to your battery. So power is coming in through here and it's going to go to this solenoid. So this lead coming in actually has multiple connections off of it, and I'll go over those in a second. But basically the solenoid is the switcher, a relay basically. So you've got the high current stuff that's coming in, and when this solenoid is fired, it makes a connection between this terminal and this terminal. So then you have power going into the battery and all that current going into it, and then through the battery, turning the motor, and then your current is coming out down here through this back lead and back to the battery. Simple. So the first positive connection we have is going to come down to the switch. Your switch is going to plug in here. When you push the button, you're completing the circuit. So then that positive is going to be coming up the other side and then connected to this side of the solenoid. So the other side of the solenoid is going to be connected to the body of the motor, which completes a circuit to ground through this big cable. So when you push the button and you complete this circuit, that solenoid fires and completes the other circuit, if that makes sense. Now there are other connections that are going to come off of this solenoid, such as for the voltmeter. That orange wire is going to connect to the positive on the bottom of the voltmeter, with that yellow wire going to, again, the body of the motor. One other set of connections is for the fan. So the purple lead is also going to connect to this positive terminal going to the battery. And then the blue one, again, is going to connect to the body of the motor to ground. That completes the circuit for the fan. The fan has its own switch on and off. But that is how simple an Enjoy lure coursing machine is. Now I'm going to show you how to put it together. Okay, let's look at what all we're going to have for parts and tools. So we've got a brand new 12 volt DC 2.5 horsepower motor right here. I usually end up cleaning two of the spots with a file so they make good connections to the ground, both for the small connections and on that side for the large connections. We're going to mount this stud up so it's easier to get to the solenoid. So this is a solenoid, 4 connections coming off of it, 2 for the switch, and then 2 for the motor connection circuit. Other parts, we've got the 2 battery cables here, the interconnect between the solenoid and the motor cable. These are for connecting the solenoid to the stand. Our fan connections, our solenoid to ground wire, 4 motor bolts. Those are 3/8 by 24, 1 1/4 bolts, which you can find at Lowe's if you do need one. Several washers. Some of these will actually be mounted on the machine. Some of them will be used for stands to mount or to hold the motor upright while we're putting the stand on. That's what those little washers are for. A set of tools. I usually recommend people buy a set of wrenches which have flex heads on them. So this is a ratcheting wrench, but it also flexes so you can get in tight spaces. You can find those on Amazon. I think this is a set of Craftsman that I probably picked up from Lowe's or something. And then a non-conducting plastic thing. It doesn't need to be specific. You could probably use a pencil, but I'll show you what this is used for in a minute. First step is I usually take the motor and stand it upright. So what I'm going to do is take a series of 3 washers and stick those under either side. So with my washers holding this from wobbling back and forth and upright, I'm going to end up taking the rest of the washers and putting those where I need them. So 3 washers are used as spacers on normal corners. And if you've got a corner that is going to have a wire coming off of it, like the battery cable or the 3 connectors, I'll use 2 washers on that corner. So 2 spacers there, 2 spacers there, 2 on this corner, and then 3 on the last. Okay, so once we have those all lined up, we're going to take the motor stand and drop it on the motor. Okay, so with the motor like this, perfectly up and down, we're going to get this little wire out of the way real quick, and then we're going to end up dropping our lure stand right on top. I'm not going to worry about putting any washers or any bolts. I'm not going to worry about putting any wires in right now. I just want to get everything aligned and get a few bolts in the holes, and then we could selectively put the wires in afterwards. I'm just hand tightening right now, making sure everything is getting threaded. Okay, at this point, all 4 washers are in. If you have to tighten it down, this is the 9/16 right here. Okay, at this point, with the bolts just grabbing the motor, you can upend it. Okay, so now we have a motor sitting here. We're gonna have to put wires on in a second. But first, let's get our solenoid connected. So here's our solenoid, and here are the 2 carriage mounting bolts that are driven into the lure stand and being held in there by the squares on the other side. There's like a square piece of this bolt which is driven into the board, and it doesn't actually rotate in the board. So here, let's move these washers out of the way. You're going to use a lock nut and a washer to hold the solenoid. I usually put the flat side up right here. Before we lock this down, we're going to want to run 2 wires behind the solenoid. So we'll get that locked in right there, and that'll hold the solenoid on for a second. So the longer of the switch wires is going to go in behind. So we'll just thread this in here, right behind. So this is going to go to the large connection, and you can see the size of the hole. This one goes right here. We're also going to need to thread the small side of this up through and behind, because this will go to this switch connection right there. We've also got this orange wire which needs to connect onto the positive, and this routes this way. Let's get that behind that bolt hole right there. Well, if your solenoid does come off, you can just push that washer out of the way and flip that solenoid back under. There it is. Okay, so this will come down and wire right onto the solenoid there. Okay, one last connection to the solenoid is going to be the fan wires, but those don't actually get routed in behind the solenoid, so we don't have to worry about that one right now. So washer and nut on the other side. Now I usually shift the solenoid all the way to the left so that I can get my wrench onto it. Okay, so we're twisting this way. And this is the 7/16 wrench right here that I'm tightening with. Okay, crank that down. Might not be able to get in, that's why it's good to have an open end wrench right here. I'm betting now that we can get that bolt down a little bit. We can get the ratchet on there, get a little faster. Okay, that solenoid is now solid on the machine. Okay, and we've got our wires routed. Make sure the wires wiggle free and can move a little bit. Okay, everybody's good, nobody's pinched. All right, now we're gonna flip this back on its back. We don't have to worry about the washers at this point because everything's pretty well aligned. And we're gonna take off this bottom one. Now here's where that plastic thingamajiggy comes in, or whatever pencil. Stick that down the hole. Make sure it is not metal, can't scratch up anything down in there, because if you look down in that hole, you can actually see the motor core. So we don't want to poke that with anything metal like a screwdriver. So, but what we're doing is retaining our washers as we're trying to get the terminals connected up. So we're going to take the negative terminal right now. I usually put a little bit of this bend in this wire right here, so that when I'm feeding it under the stand between the motor, it's a little bit easier to position. Now I'm looking down the hole right now. And I'm looking for that terminal to come through. And then as I see it, without losing my washers, I'm going to push that terminal through and still thread the washers down. Get everything lined up as best you can. Grab your bolt with your washer, put it back through, and thread it. That is now back in the motor. Okay? And now we have our grounding cable on. Alright, so we're going to put that back into a vertical position. Hold this bolt right here. Again, this is a 9/16. If anything is too tight, hold that bolt and washer. Make sure our washers are aligned down in that hole. Stick our retainer in. Now this one is going to get a whole lot of connections. So this is the fan, the blue is the negative, and we're going to feed this onto the back of that motor. Okay, so again, looking down the hole, I'm going to pull my little spacer, keeping my washers in place, and then stick it back down in there. Making sure everything is nice and lined up. Okay, now we have two more connections that need to go in that hole. Let's find those. So this is the negative connection, so we need to get the yellow wire that's on the voltmeter right here into there. Sometimes it's easier while you're doing this to take the connection off the bottom of the voltmeter. I'm going to flip this up, holding that plastic in place. Nothing's going to move. And I'm going to remove these, just pull off right here. There you go. Okay, so with this wire, I'm going to feed it in from this direction. So we're going to flip this back, holding the plastic in place, not losing our washers or our current connections that we already have. Okay. I'm going to hold that blue wire in place, feed in the yellow, get that in behind. Okay, boom, a little bit of magic, got it in there. So now you can see the yellow is being held by our post. And the last one that we need to connect is this gray one. This is probably the most important because this is your switch. If you're in the middle of the field and you're doing a hot swap on a solenoid and trying to get back up and running, you can omit doing the fan in some cases if you have an alternate way to connect it, and the voltmeter if you don't need it. If you're just in a rush, make sure you get the gray wire connected and like the switch wired up, and that's pretty much all you need. And then you can worry about the voltmeter and the fan when you have time. But I do not recommend running without a fan, so make sure you have another way to connect that fan up. All right, let's feed a little bit of gray wire in. Okay, and then we're gonna line this back up, and this is gonna go pretty much right next to the blue wire. The way it feeds in, take a little pressure off the stand. Without losing our other connections. Sometimes you need 5 hands to do this. Yeah. You can always use the pressure from the stand to help as well. And this is where it gets kind of tough lining up all those, but we got it. Okay, so everybody's lined up. I'm going to use the stand to apply pressure on all of those washers and connections while I throw the bolt back in it. A little wiggle magic, downward pressure, and everything is threaded. So let's tighten this up. At this point, we're not putting any more connections between the motor and the stand, so you could tighten everything down pretty good. Again, 2 tools you really need on the field: wrenches and a ratchet. We don't really need sockets for what we're doing here today, so I haven't bothered to pull those out because I want to show you that just a few simple tools you can put this back together. Let's make sure our grounding wire is coming off nice and flat. Before we tighten this down, we're going to check the positioning on these wires. Blue and gray look good. Yellow's coming off right here, so we're going to leave that. Now we're going to tighten it down all the way. It's tight. Pretty tight. That's good. That's tight. Okay. Our motor is on all the way. Okay? That takes care of all of our negative connections. Pull this guy out a little bit. Now that he's where he needs to be. Same with the orange. We'll give him a little bit of slack so he can reach down here. This is going right here. Okay. At this point, you can actually plug back up your voltmeter, because nothing's going to change with him. That just goes on that. Okay, voltmeter's hooked up now. All right, let's worry about the rest of our connections. So we'll start with the gray negative lead that's coming from the motor housing for grounding to the left side of the solenoid. Just remove that nut, put that on right here. I'm gonna turn to the side so I get an alternate camera angle. That is tightened. I believe this is our 3/8 wrench right here. Let's see if we ratchet in there. Open end just to make sure that's good and tight. Okay. That's the negative end of the solenoid for the switch, and then here is the positive end. So we're going to take this off right here. And while this looks like it may be going to the switch, it is not. So there's our other switch connection. Again, switch is super simple. Power in to the plug. Power continues through, comes to one side of the solenoid, the other side of the solenoid is hooked to ground. A 3/8 wrench. Nice and tight. Good. That's great. So now, let's go ahead and do our interconnect while we're sitting here. So the interconnect is the short little cable that runs between the solenoid and the motor. We'll take off this bottom bolt right here, or bottom nut, and then this nut and washer from the motor. Yep, set those down. Now this usually has a bend in it right here. So it's gonna run from here to here. Spin that down. Get that other nut right here. Okay, and this should be a 1/2 inch. Helps if I tighten instead of loosen it. Okay, good and tight. Now we'll get this other connection right down here. Not a lot of wiggle room, which is why I like, and I think I'm loosening again. Of course, I'm new at this. You might get a socket in there, but I kind of doubt it. That's why these flex head wrenches are so good. Do it, tightening up. Get it good and tight. Now, last connection. Let's put our positive lead on right here. And then we're going to take the rest of our wires, hook those in. One, the purple lead from the fan. Usually put him off to the side a bit. And then the orange lead from the voltmeter. And that just goes on right there. Yep. And then we're just going to tighten up. And tighten until you can't, and then crank it down. I usually go back at this point and check all my connections, but you just saw me do everything. That is how you put a machine back together, and that's it. I mean, super simple. You need to swap out a solenoid on the field. Just make sure you route your wires while you're doing it. Remove everything, put a new one in, done. Have to remove the motor. That takes a little bit more time, but yeah, not too hard. Thank you all.